It was an ordinary day and I had just blown out my first 7 birthday candles when my parents dropped the bombshell on my brothers and me. We were moving, and not just anywhere, but to a huge house much more spacious and beautiful than the small apartment where we lived. That made me a lot happier because I'm part of a pretty big family, 7 in total. My papas, my 4 brothers and me, who's the second to last. The new house was in a much quieter area near a forest, which felt great. I mean, what 7-year-old wouldn't be happy to have a whole forest to explore? After a month of moving boxes and organizing everything, we were finally comfortable in our new abode. I was sharing a room with my older sister Leah. Our room was quite large and very nice, with a huge window that took up almost the entire wall. My bed was right in front of it, and although at first everything seemed perfect, a few weeks later I began to notice strange things. Late at night, just as I was falling asleep, some knocking on the window started to sound. I thought it was the breeze, a tree branch or something, so I didn't think much of it. However, this became a nightly habit. Every other day, sometime between 9 and 10 p.m., those knocks would come back. It wasn't just me, Leah would hear it too, and even our cat would get nervous if she slept in my bed, curling up against me when the noises started. That gave me some peace of mind, so it wasn't so bad. A couple of years went by, and as I got to be 9, the banging not only continued, but the scratching started, as if someone was scraping their nails against the window. That terrified me, but whenever I looked out to see what it was, the noise stopped. Our pet stopped sleeping with me because the noise scared him, plus Leah got her own room. So there I was, alone, and a little sad that my cat was no longer cuddling with me. When I finally told my parents what was going on, after more than 2 years of experiencing this phenomenon, they told me that I was imagining things and that I needed to stop eating so much. Their response frustrated me and made me feel very bad, because I always had a few extra kilos and that everything that happened to me was associated to my fatness really bothered me. So I said nothing more and started sleeping on the couch in the living room, believing that I would be safe there. But of course, that didn't work, because the banging and scratching started to sound in the living room as well. I even tried sleeping in the bathroom, which had no windows, but all I could hear was the noise at the door. It was horrible. I couldn't ignore it, and little by little it became a nightmare. Over time, every year it seemed to get worse. By the time I turned 12, the noises were getting louder and louder, banging, scratching, and even what sounded like kicks. But one day, when I was 13, I surprisingly heard nothing for an entire week. That week of no noises turned into a month, and then that month turned into a whole year of peace. It was amazing. I slept better, felt more energetic, and if that wasn't enough, my cat was back to snuggling up to me at night. My family noticed changes in my attitude and told me it was great, so no one bothered to ask me weird questions. One afternoon, I was playing soccer in the backyard with my younger brother Andy, and everything was going great. We were kicking the ball back and forth, laughing and enjoying ourselves until I kicked it so hard that the ball went flying into the woods. We looked at each other, a little nervous, but decided to go get it. However, after a couple of laps, there was no sign of the ball and we were already quite far from home. It was very strange because we had already searched all the nearby places where we assumed the ball might have fallen. After all, what had kicked it to make it disappear like that? Seeing that it was getting dark, I said to Andy, "Hey, it's time to go back." But suddenly he shouted to me, "Wait, look," pointing up a small hill. There was a log cabin and a guy at the entrance holding our soccer ball. My instinct told me it wasn't a good idea to approach, so I tried to turn around, but sure enough, Andy, excited, ran up the hill yelling, "Hey, you got our ball, give it back." I felt a knot in my stomach at that moment, but I couldn't let him go alone, so I followed him. When we got to the guy's yard, he smiled and said, "Oh, sorry, I didn't know it was yours, it just rolled over here." I started to relax a little and told him that I was sorry, that we were just playing and he had kicked it too hard, although it didn't stop making noise to me that he claimed the ball had rolled over there, when it was almost at the top of a hill and quite far from our yard. I mean, that was practically impossible. But I decided not to make a big deal out of it because he seemed friendly. The man was tall and thin with short brown hair. He introduced himself as Adam and suddenly started asking us how old we were. That made me a little uncomfortable, so I kept quiet, but Andy, without a second thought, blurted out, "I'm 9 and she's 14. He pointed toward our house and said we lived there. Obviously, I looked at him with a, "What are you doing?" face. There was a weird silence after that, and just when I thought things couldn't get any weirder, Adam said something that chilled my blood, and I could tell Andy was freaked out too because his expression abruptly changed. Adam, with his weird laugh, said, "Yeah, I know, I see them outside sometimes." At that point, I felt super uncomfortable. I told Andy that we better get back home because our dads must be wondering where we were by now. Adam sighed and said okay, so we ran back to the house, relieved to have escaped. Once inside, I started talking and told Andy that it wasn't his fault that Adam had turned out to be a creep, and we decided not to tell our parents about what had happened in the woods because we knew they would be mad at us for walking away like that. Now, come to think of it, that was silly. A week after that, I was about to fall asleep with my cat in bed enjoying the quiet, when suddenly I heard those annoying knocks again. Knock, knock. I couldn't believe it. After a year without those disturbing noises, here they were again. I was terrified. I looked up, and as expected, when I did, the noise stopped. But as soon as I looked back in the opposite direction, bam! It started again. My cat shot out of my room, and that scared me even more because now I was all alone. I had had enough of this situation, so I decided to go outside to investigate if there was anything or anyone out there. I got up, walked to the back door, and went out. It was around 10 p.m., and everything was pitch black. I hadn't found a flashlight, so I relied on the dim moonlight. Suddenly, I felt someone grab me from behind and cover my mouth. That completely terrified me. I started kicking like crazy and trying to scream, but whoever had me wouldn't let go, and I felt myself being dragged into the woods. At that point, I was in a complete panic, and my mind was racing trying to find a way to escape from this person. So I did the first thing that came to my mind, biting his hand, and it worked. He let out a scream and then let go of me. I then seized that moment and kicked him in the shin as hard as I could, but as I looked at him, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was Adam. "Damn brat," he said as he tried to catch me again. I didn't think twice and started running home screaming as loud as I could. As I ran, I saw that my dad had come out with his shotgun in his hand and a flashlight, so I started screaming louder. And fortunately, he saw me and started running towards me. Then he saw Adam, who had stopped following me when he noticed my dad's presence and stood at the edge of the woods, so he yelled at him to get away or he would shoot him. At that instant, my mom came out as well, and I ran to her asking her to call the police. Dad repeated to Adam that he planned to call the police and ordered him to stay where he was. But Adam, in a last-ditch attempt, threw a huge rock he had in his hand straight at my dad's head, hitting him with an accurate blow that knocked him to the ground, giving Adam a chance to escape. Just as we lost sight of Adam's sick man, we heard the sound of 2 police sirens approaching, and a mixture of relief and fear washed over me. When the cops finally arrived, I sat down with my parents and told them everything that had happened. I explained how Adam had run back to his house and that there was something in my gut telling me that something had to be done, and fast. While some of the police moved towards Adam's house, others stayed with me and my parents. Tension was in the air. We were all nervous. Suddenly, we heard a shot and then another. In total, 11 shots rang out. When the officers returned, they started talking to my parents. I didn't hear everything, but then my mom told me the most important things. She said that, upon arrival, the 2 police officers quickly broke down the door and found Adam sitting on the floor with his back against the wall. When they ordered him to get up and put his hands behind his back, Adam stood up and in the blink of an eye turned around and shot one of the cops. Everything went chaotic from there. He kept firing left and right without any qualms, but luckily one of the policemen was able to return fire. Unfortunately, Adam had already killed 1 officer and wounded 3 others in the process. In the end, Adam himself had also ended up dead. The police told us that, when they searched his house, they found pictures of all of us taped to the walls. Me, Andy, Alba, Ernst, Dahlia, and my dad's, and a bunch of other pictures of boys and girls from the village. It gave me a chill just thinking about it. Also, they mentioned that they had found 2 dead bodies in what appeared to be his room. I could only think that he was the one who had been knocking on my window all those years. I was terrified at the thought of him being a random man behind it all, and although I was terrified, I felt a huge relief knowing that he no longer posed a threat to my family. Despite what happened, we still lived in the same house. My cat, who had been a little tense during all this drama, got used to sleeping with me again. Now I'm happy that things have calmed down and feel normal, but sometimes I still have nightmares about Adam, remembering his creepy smile and those horrible knocks he used to make on my window. It's a sickening feeling. I wouldn't wish for anyone else to have to go through something like that. This is an anecdote that will leave you in shock, and the worst thing is that I lived it myself and now I want to share it with all of you. What happened is really disturbing, and some would say it was too extreme. I still can't understand why it all happened the way it did, but all I know is that it has left a mark on me for life. It all started when I was 26 years old. At that time, I was living with my parents and had saved a good amount of money working as a salesman. As I was approaching my 30s, I wanted to move house, so I looked at some real estate agents to find a place that wasn't so expensive and suited my requirements. After a month of searching, I found a local agent who seemed to have experience. I remember he was showing a house that was about an hour away from my parents' house. My agent set up an appointment to show me the house and see if I was interested. When the day came, my agent, my father, and I took a Saturday afternoon drive to meet the owners of the property and take a look at the property. On the way, I saw several farms, farm animals, and the owners at work. That area was distinctly rural, a far cry from the city life I was used to. I remember seeing a nice house with a "for sale" sign in the yard. At first glance, the home looked quite nice. Clearly, the people who had lived there knew how to take care of their home. Arriving on the porch, we were greeted by a middle-aged couple. The guy introduced himself as Martin, while his wife's name was Felicia. My agent introduced us to them and we started to enter the house. I remember it wasn't very big, but it had enough space. 2 floors, 3 bedrooms, and a bathroom. To be honest, I already felt like the house had what I needed and was in very good condition. It was perfect for my parents to come over on weekends. When I told the owners I was interested, you could tell how excited they were. We assumed the couple was excited to move and just wanted to get rid of the house as soon as possible. Then as we left, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the couple looking up at the ceiling with their hands clasped, chanting something that looked like a prayer. It struck me as odd, but I decided to think they were just pretty religious. After a week of talking with my agent and my parents, I finally made the decision to go ahead with the purchase. The house was at a surprisingly low price, which was perfect for my budget, so we quickly formalized the purchase. I signed all the papers and made the down payment the day I moved in. My dad and uncle came over to help me move some things into my new home. I remember that day I saw my new neighbor standing on his porch, a guy who looked to be about 45 years old, bald and chubby. We made eye contact and he greeted me politely. I replied, "Hi, you must be my new neighbor?" "Ah, yes, welcome to our humble neighborhood. My name is Ted, nice to meet you," he said. "I'm Alan, but you can call me Al." "It's nice to meet you too, Ted," I said. Ted smiled kindly at me and then asked, "Do you need help moving your stuff?" I told him I could manage on my own, but if he wanted to help me, I'd be grateful. Truth be told, I still had some heavy boxes that I could use a little help with, so I wasn't going to spurn an extra hand. Ted came over to my house and introduced himself to my dad and uncle. During the day, we managed to get all our stuff in the house and shared a few laughs and a couple of beers. It wasn't very cold because I hadn't hooked up the fridge yet, but they still came in handy. As strange as our first meeting had been, Ted turned out to be a nice guy. We ended up having a couple more beers as the night was pretty intense. When the clock struck 11 p.m., my dad and uncle left and I was left alone with Ted. I noticed he was looking at a Van Gogh painting I had in my living room, a gift from the previous owners. It was curious to see him so focused on the work, so I asked him, "Are you a fan of paintings?" He said, "Yes, Starry Night is sublime, don't you think?" I replied, "Sure. It is one of the most incredible works in history. Well-deserved credit for it." He smiled and said, "In fact, it was me who painted it and I gave it to the previous owners as a housewarming gift." That really surprised me. "Really? Wow, that's amazing, but it looks like they left it, doesn't it?" He nodded and said to me, "Exactly. It looks like they left the gift for you." "It looks that way, but I gotta tell you, if you really painted this, you're incredibly talented, man," I said. He thanked me and then said, "Hey, can I tell you something?" "Sure," I replied. "I used to live in this house. In fact, I lived here for 2 decades, long before the previous owners." That statement struck me as a little odd, so I asked, "Why did you move next door?" "Well, my wife moved out a while ago," Ted explained. "I always wanted more space, so I thought if I stayed close by, maybe I'd come back someday. Plus, this house has 2 extra bedrooms, so, yeah." I replied, "Wow, I'm sorry to hear that, buddy. I hope he comes back someday and they can work things out," I said, feeling a little sorry for him. Although I also moved out because the house is haunted," he joked, perhaps to lighten the melancholy air that had formed around us a bit. After that, we had a couple more beers and Ted went home. As my neighbor walked out the door, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of paranoia at that comment about the haunted. I wondered why he would make such an uptight joke, especially with what he mentioned about his wife. I didn't know if he was joking or if there was some truth to that about the place having a bad vibe. It was clear to me that the next time I saw him, I would ask him about it. A few days passed in my new home, and I could tell that living there was pretty cool, but my paranoia started to rise like crazy. Every time I heard creaks in the floor or the wind blowing through the window, I would get nervous and remember what Ted said. I wondered if maybe that had been the reason his wife had decided to leave the house. Clearly, I wouldn't be nosy enough to ask him the reason she left, but it did make me a little uneasy. My coworkers even noticed that I was coming in tired. I had been losing more sleep than I would like to admit. It frustrated me to think that I hadn't seen Ted since I moved in, as if he had gone into his house and didn't want to come out. I didn't know if his car was in the garage, so it was a total mystery. This is when it gets really weird. I remember one night I couldn't sleep, tossing and turning in bed because of the strange and constant noises coming from the house. Finally, I decided to get up and crawled toward my bedroom door. From downstairs, I could hear soft mumbling, not like normal rustling, but a male voice saying things I didn't understand. I tried not to make a sound as I walked down the stairs, tiptoeing, concentrating on each step so as not to attract the attention of that whatever. With each step I took, the murmur grew louder. It was clear that someone was downstairs. When I got halfway down the stairs, I saw Ted standing in my living room staring at the Van Gogh painting. My first impulse was to yell at him to leave and call the police, but the thought of putting myself in danger stopped me. So I stood there, crouched down and covering my mouth, feeling a mixture of fury and bewilderment as I wondered what the hell this guy was doing in my house at that hour. How had he gotten in? Was he responsible for all those weird noises? Panic was coursing through my veins as I managed to make out some of the things he was saying. "You're in a better place, honey. You need to know that I still love you. You were the best woman I could have ever wished for. Every moment with you was special. I hope you can forgive me for this someday. I only did what I had to do to stay out of jail. See you in the next life, sweetheart. Rest in peace, Priscilla." Then he walked away like it was nothing, and I listened as he locked the back door. I was sure he must have a copy of the key, so I kept the lights off so as not to give him any clue that I was awake. I immediately grabbed my phone and dialed 911. "What's your emergency?" the operator asked. "Someone just broke into my house. I think it's my neighbor. Stay on the line. We are sending a unit. Hurry, he might come back. Can you give me your address?" Of course. I gave him my address and then, without hanging up, I put my phone down on the floor and walked over to one of the cabinets where I kept some things. I pulled out an axe and a helmet with a flashlight and started moving toward the painting. I don't know exactly what made me do it, but my anxiety increased so much that I ended up knocking the painting off the wall and throwing it aside. And there, behind the painting, I saw a patch on the wall that looked out of place, as if I had plugged a hole. That's when I picked up the axe and started pounding on the wall like a madman. I could only see red. Each blow took away the anger and fear I had built up that night. The more destruction I caused, the more dark secrets emerged. Suddenly, as the pieces began to fall, the decomposing body of a woman appeared. She clearly was, for she had a pink dress and long dark hair. I couldn't believe it. I had been living with a corpse behind that wall. As I lay motionless in front of the wall in complete shock, police sirens could be heard approaching. Blue and red lights illuminated my window and entered the house. At that instant, my body thawed and I ran for the door, waving my arms in desperation and shouting, "Here, here!" After I told them about the dead body and my neighbor's strange behavior, the officers began knocking on his door, but they could not enter without a warrant. Minutes later, I heard chaos inside Ted's house. I immediately ran over there to see what was going on, and what I saw left me in complete shock. Ted had blown his head off with a shotgun, and his body was lying in the middle of the living room, very close to a portrait of him and his wife at their wedding. The body I had found in my house behind the picture turned out to be that of his wife. He had claimed that she had run away, but the truth was that he had strangled her, then taken her body and hidden it in the wall before putting the house up for sale, as if it were a neatly packaged gift for the new owners. Some said she moved next door because the ghost of her husband haunted her daily, which wouldn't surprise me, as the same was true for me. After that, I put the house on the market. I really couldn't live there anymore knowing what had happened. Fortunately, a shepherd couple bought it a month later and I was able to buy another property not far from there. So far, I have not known if these people have suffered any kind of paranormal phenomena, but I really hope not. I hope that Ted's wife's spirit was finally able to rest in peace after finding justice. All of this happened in a single week, just as those you thought were close can become strangers in the blink of an eye. Sometimes you only need to see someone a couple of times to realize who they really are. It all started in the fall of 2011. A new neighbor moved in next door. Apparently, she arrived alone. She was a tall, slender, dark-haired woman with a very particular touch of elegance. She brought with her little more than a small moving van. She left what she could in the garage, and that was all. She had a mysterious air about her. She seemed to be hiding from the world, as she covered her face with rather large sunglasses and a black ski mask, although at that time we didn't even think about the pandemic. She went for a walk every morning. I used to look at her through the window, although I tried not to do it too much for fear that she would see me, and I didn't want her to take me for a stalker. But the truth is that I was very intrigued by this woman. I don't know if it was attraction or just curiosity, but I couldn't help but have my attention on her. However, on the fourth day after she moved in, I saw her leaning out the window of her house, watching me. That look made me uncomfortable. It had a disturbing air about it, but at the same time it made me feel connected in a strange way. This went on for several days, so I finally decided to talk to her. Maybe she was just a little nervous about meeting someone new. It was a Monday morning. The sky was dark, the air felt thick, and combined with my sweat, it left me feeling quite restless. But I decided not to let that stop me, so I snapped out of my thoughts and walked down my porch steps to accost my new neighbor, just as she was leaving her house. I was worried she might think I was a stalker, so I was careful as I approached. "Hi, I'm Diego. Sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help but notice that..." I paused. Her reaction was unexpected. She suddenly stood still, looking at me with an expression that made me feel strange. She kept her gaze straight ahead, as if she was waiting for me to speak, and at the same time as if she didn't want to hear me at all. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's the only way I can describe it. "Sorry, I didn't mean to stop you. How do you like the new neighborhood?" The tense silence in the air after my question felt like a shrill scream cutting through the air. After a couple of minutes that felt like hours, the woman simply turned around and walked to her car. I stood there, totally confused. I had barely said a couple of words to her, and I was already being ignored. Rejection is a normal thing, of course, but I couldn't let that put me off. Maybe tomorrow I would try again. This time I would knock on her door and bring her some gift to lighten the situation, just to satiate my curiosity about her. Tuesday was a real disaster. I woke up with that horrible feeling that someone was watching me. I got up in a hurry and went to check the windows in the bathroom, but no one was there, of course. I was just overreacting, or so I thought. I went downstairs to retrieve the muffin tray I had made the day before. It wasn't much, but it was the best option I could think of to have something to justify my visit. It was either that or stay in that awkward silence from the day before. So cupcakes in hand, I left the house. It was around 9 a.m. and it was freezing cold, so as I stepped outside, a shiver ran down my spine, not only from the temperature but also from my nerves. I crossed my lawn with a bit of haste, feeling the icy wind hit my face as I approached his door. But suddenly, it burst open. I was stunned to see the woman standing motionless in the doorway, her gaze fixed on the ground, enveloping us in a silence even more uncomfortable than yesterday. I tried to act more confident, but before I could say anything, she let out a growl that chilled my blood and said, "Don't come back again or he'll get you." Then he slammed the door shut, almost hitting my nose with it, but I didn't hear footsteps on the other side. I could hardly believe it. He must have been there, waiting for me to walk away. But I was just standing there, mouth open, trying to figure out what had just happened. I just wanted to hand her the cookies. But that warning had darker overtones than I expected and left me uneasy. I definitely needed to know more about her. Then Wednesday came. The sun was shining through the fog, creating a bright atmosphere on the street as the woman left her house and headed for her car. But today, things were different. Her every step was much slower. She seemed to calculate every movement as if she was listening intently for any noise or the presence of someone nearby. However, she didn't notice that I was there, watching curiously. My intention had shifted from simply getting to know her to a desire to discover what was really going on behind that facade. Finally, the woman reached her car and shot me a glance from my porch as she pulled up in front of it. She seemed hesitant, as if she was waiting for something to happen. But finally, when she felt she was safe enough, she grabbed the handle and got into the car. Luckily for me, he didn't hesitate to start, and in a couple of seconds, he disappeared from my sight. This was my chance, so I grabbed my backpack and ran towards her house. I watched the windows as I approached, hoping that the front door windows were closed. But to my surprise, the door was wide open. Weird, I thought, but I kept going. I entered cautiously, as if I was waiting for something or someone to welcome me. But as I crossed the threshold, I found only emptiness. The house was stripped of furniture, nothing was around except a strange painting hanging in the hallway. I approached to get a better look, and it was an image of a woman with a horrible, distorted face. Her mouth seemed to be stretched sideways with scary, sunken eyes. Her nose was raised oddly, and her teeth were misaligned. Why would anyone hang something so disturbing in their home? But just then, a voice echoed behind me. "What are you doing here?" A shiver ran through me from head to toe. I turned around very slowly, feeling every muscle in my body stiffen like a block, and there was the woman, dressed in black. Her eyes fixed on the floor, her huge sunglasses and her face covering almost her entire face. "I told you to stay away. If you come back, I'll set your house on fire with you in it," he threatened. His voice was cold and eerie. At that moment, a loud banging sound echoed from upstairs. My blood froze and panic set in. Without a second thought, I bolted out the door, dodging the woman and running straight for home. I looked back and saw her standing there in the doorway, but right behind her, huge hands slammed the door shut. I was completely shocked. Something horrible was happening in that place. Then I remembered the horrible painting I had seen in her living room and began to think that this could perhaps be the image of that same woman. And maybe that was the reason why she always covered her face. Who knows what creepy things were behind that mysterious woman, but from that day on, I never looked at that woman again, let alone tried to find out anything more about her. Fortunately, only a month later, she moved to another place. Since then, a long list of people have occupied that house, but for some reason no one has stayed there for more than 2 weeks. All those who have rented it end up abandoning it after a few days. The first place I stayed after leaving my parents' house was a small, somewhat dingy apartment on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't the nicest place in the world, but it was cheap, and best of all, it was mine. There were several students from the nearby community college living there, and most of us were cool. Sometimes we would go out and do something. However, there was one guy who made the good vibes evaporate into thin air every time he showed up. I don't even know if any of us knew his name or if we had actually had a chat with him. We'd just see him hanging around the laundry room wearing the same set of clothes over and over again. Most of us simply considered him the homeless guy in the building. Such was life trying to save on rent. That wasn't the only problem with the complex, of course. The walls were so thin that I could literally hear everything going on in the apartments next door. That said, I didn't mind so much because the girl who lived next door was a bombshell, a real college beauty. I always dreamed that living so close we would eventually cross paths and be able to connect. But alas, it was as if she did everything she could to stay out of sight. She would run out of her door and slam it shut in the middle of the night. However, the thin walls let me hear much of her life without really knowing her. She was always on her phone, talking quite loudly to someone. Occasionally, she would invite a friend over for the night, which caused me to lose a couple of hours of sleep. All in all, she seemed like a nice person to me until one night it all got weird. It was a Saturday, and I had been having a good time with my friends for a while, so I fell asleep late, but woke up in the pitch dark, startled by what sounded like screaming and yelling coming from his apartment. "Get out of there! What the hell are you doing? You're horrible!" he yelled as if he was about to explode. It sounded like an intense fight, which was weird because I had never heard my neighbor make such a racket ever. Just as I was thinking there might be something else going on, I started hearing voices. I shrugged and rolled over in bed, thinking it was probably some kind of romantic drama and not worth losing sleep over. It wasn't my problem, so I decided to go back to sleep. But at dawn, a strange restlessness woke me up. I don't know why, but a feeling came over me that something was wrong with my neighbor and this was haunting me. So I left my apartment and knocked on her door. "Hello?" I shouted, but no one answered. I tried a couple more times and nothing. I got frustrated but decided to walk away for a bit and leaned on the railing of the second-floor corridor and looked around the parking lot searching for his car. The parking spaces were assigned right next to the apartments, and to my relief, I saw her car there. Then I thought I heard her door open, but when I turned around, it wasn't her. It was the weird guy from the neighborhood, the one you never saw leaving his apartment. The guy had an eerie look on his face and was staring at me. "Can I help you?" he asked me with an annoyed attitude. "What's going on with all the banging?" I asked. I didn't even know why I was talking to him, since during the months I had been in that place I had never seen him move. I started to approach my neighbor's door, but the guy was still tucked behind her door like he was a ninja or something. "Hey, have you seen your neighbor? The girl? You know who I mean?" I asked. He frowned, like I'd given him some terrible offense. "Oh, the girl. Her name was Allie," he said at last. But he said it as if I had asked him about the weather. "How come you know her name?" I asked, I thought to myself. "What do you mean by was, Lily?" I blurted out, a little confused. "I don't know," he replied, his tone now even more irritating. "Listen, I'm worried about her. I heard a lot of weird noises in her apartment last night and she's not responding to me," I explained. "Have you seen her lately?" But his response was simply no idea, which left me with a ringing in my ears and a growing sense that something smelled, and it was precisely her signature bad smell. "Have you seen her lately?" I asked again, trying to get the guy to loosen up a bit. "Come on, dude, your walls are as thin as mine. Didn't you hear anything weird last night? You had to have heard it," I insisted. He just stood there, standing there, and then I realized how weird he had gotten. His hands were balled into fists and his knuckles had turned so white they looked like they were about to crack. I could see beads of sweat beading on his forehead, but he didn't say anything. He just kept looking at me with those wild eyes. "Hey, look, I don't want to scare you, I'm sorry, why don't we sit down and talk about this inside?" I suggested. But suddenly he did something I wasn't expecting. He slammed the door shut just as I was leaning against it. I staggered and fell backwards, breaking a finger as I fell. With my finger covered in pain and quite annoyed by what he did, I decided I couldn't just stand idly by, so I kicked his door with all my might. I didn't think it would work, but suddenly bang, the door burst open, exploding into splinters. From inside, I heard a muffled scream from the guy. However, I didn't care in the least. I peeked out and glanced into his living room, but what I saw took my breath away. Right there was my neighbor, or what was left of her. It was truly gruesome, the most horrible and traumatic thing I have ever seen in my life. Her living room was filled with pieces of something that had been a person, all laid out on the floor as part of a macabre ritual. The walls were full of strange drawings among symbols and other kinds of scribbles, but they weren't just drawings. They were made with blood, and there, scattered there, were a lot of human parts. Also bloody bras and underwear, locks of red hair that I recognized instantly, and the scalp was still attached to some of those locks. The image was horrible and unbearable. I had seen more than enough for that morning. At that moment, I realized the situation I was in. I definitely didn't want to get involved with a guy who dismembered bodies, let alone be his neighbor. I felt trapped, like the world had gone completely mad. After what happened with Allie, I felt terrible. I felt enormous guilt. I couldn't believe I had been sleeping while this guy was doing this atrocity to her. I thought about how if I hadn't ignored his screams, I could have done something for her, and somehow that feeling will haunt me forever. I immediately ran out of there, but to my surprise, the guy did nothing to follow me or silence me in any way. I'm a big man and he was a rather small and puny guy. Maybe for that reason he did not venture to attack me, and because he surely did not have a firearm. I immediately called the police and alerted the rest of my neighbors. But as soon as I hung up the 911 call, I called my landlord and broke the lease in the blink of an eye. I will definitely never lease a cheap place again, because you get just what you pay for. Last year, Max and I finally moved into our dream house. It was a 2-story house in the suburbs, painted green with a big yard and nice garden. I had always wanted to live in a neighborhood like that ever since I was a kid. On my first day unpacking boxes, I heard a knock on the door. When I went to open it, I saw that Max had let in the neighbor, a woman who introduced herself as Fanny. She was older, quite thin, and seemed very excited to have new neighbors. She brought me a bouquet of daisies as a welcoming gift and began to tell me how sad she felt about her last neighbors leaving and how excited she was to meet me. At the end, she gave me a warm hug and said goodbye. I thought she was a lovely person and appreciated the nice gesture she made with the flowers. As she closed the door, Max looked at me with a raised eyebrow and said, "Can you believe her?" I didn't understand why, since Fanny seemed nice. "She's the phoniest person I've ever seen," he asserted. "Really? I didn't think so," I replied. "I thought we should at least get to know her a little better before judging her." Max disagreed and told me he didn't want me to invite her home. I shrugged, although I considered his mistrust overdone. The next day, Fanny showed up again, and this time with a cake. Max wasn't home, and I knew he didn't trust her, but it would be rude to turn her away, so I invited her in and we shared a coffee. It was quite a nice time. We talked for about an hour, and then she went to the bathroom before leaving. Max arrived later, and I decided not to mention that she had been here. I didn't want us to have an argument. However, as I was getting ready for bed, I noticed that my jewelry box was empty. All my valuable things were gone. I knew they hadn't been missing during the move because I had gone through them that morning. The only other person in the house had been Fanny. I was sure she was involved. Because of this fact, I was forced to tell Max everything. Of course, he was angry with me for letting her in, but then he said, "I'm going to confront her right now." Seeing his expression, I knew he was ready to fight. "Maybe we should call the police and report the theft," I said, but she didn't listen to me. "That lady is completely crazy. Maybe she's a kleptomaniac or something similar. If you call the police on her first day here, she's going to make our lives miserable. I can tell you that. I've dealt with weird people before, it's no joke," commented Max, who was a social worker and had been through a few crazy things in his career. I decided I had to confront the issue with the lady. "I'm going to talk to her easy. I'm not going to accuse her of anything, I just want to clear things up for myself," I told him. He seemed hesitant, but let me handle it. I stood in front of Fanny's door and rang the bell. She opened it with a smile. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I just noticed that my jewelry is missing. Do you know anything about it?" I blurted out without preamble and with a clear accusatory tone. The lady became defensive. "What are you accusing me of? Are you accusing me of something?" "I'm not accusing you of anything," I replied. "I'm just trying to understand what happened." At that moment, I froze. She had tucked her hair behind her ear, and I could clearly see that she was wearing a pair of my earrings. "Those are mine!" I shouted at her very indignantly, and she immediately slammed the door in my face. I returned home feeling defeated and very, very angry. I told Max everything, and he started laughing. "That woman is quite a piece of work," he said to me with a chuckle. I didn't think there was anything funny about it and was ready to call the police, but he had another idea. "Why don't we go over to her house when she's gone and get your jewelry back?" It seemed like a far-fetched plan, but he was convinced it was the only way to get me to understand that I couldn't go around stealing. "Okay, but we do it together and without anyone getting hurt," I replied. He nodded with a big smile as if I had proposed a bungee jump or something. The next day, Max settled in the kitchen window getting the best view of Fanny's house. After a while, he shouted excitedly and called out to me, "Fanny's gone, come on." We jumped into his backyard and tried to open the door, but as expected, it was locked. However, after a couple of minutes of searching, I saw that there was a window in the basement that was slightly open. It wasn't very big, but I knew I could sneak in, although Max couldn't, so I told him to stay outside watching while I went in to get my stuff. Although he didn't seem too cool about me going in alone, I managed to convince him. I immediately slipped through the window and fell into a dark basement, but when I turned on the light, the sight was impressive. There were piles of stolen wallets, clothes, accessories, and a lot of valuable stuff. It looked like some kind of treasure vault. And there, on one of the shelves, I found a plastic bag full of my jewelry. She hadn't even bothered to put them in a jewelry box. I couldn't believe it. Some of those pieces were worth a fortune, and she had stuffed them into a Ziploc like it was nothing. Without a second thought, I grabbed the bag and ran to the window. I started to climb over the sill, but before I could climb all the way out, I heard someone throat-clearing behind me. I didn't see who it was because my head was already out, but I knew Fanny was right behind. Max grabbed my hands to help me out. "You're supposed to be the lookout," I yelled at him. But now I couldn't get out because Fanny had caught me by my legs and was trying to drag me back. I guess she had more strength or put more willpower into it because Max couldn't stop her from dragging me back into the basement. "You're trespassing in my house," she said. "And besides, you're a thief." "Me? A thief? Are you kidding me? Look at all this stuff." "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "Because I can," she replied, smiling. Then he grabbed a garden gnome and threw it at my head. He was trying to knock me out, but it didn't work. The blow knocked me to the side and I felt a stabbing pain in my head. But I was determined to defend myself, so I grabbed a soccer trophy that was nearby and held it up like a weapon. She kept trying to hit me with that troll, but I managed to block her with the trophy. Then with all the strength I had, I gave her a good hit and the in my hand, which made her let go of the gnome and she was disarmed. Then I threw the trophy at him and hit him right in the temple. At that moment I saw him fall backwards to the ground unconscious, and now his head and nose were starting to bleed. When I saw this, I was horrified and panicked. Max helped me out the window and we called the police. I was terrified that I would be arrested for what happened, because even though it was self-defense, it was her house, and now she was lying there unconscious. If I told the police the truth, I don't think they would believe me, but Max smiled and told me everything was going to be okay. When the two policemen arrived, one took Fanny away in an ambulance, and the other came to ask us what had happened. My heart was pounding and I started to say it was just self-defense, but the officer didn't look convinced. Then Max jumped in and said, "Watch this," and pulled out his phone. He started playing a video he had recorded from the basement window, where you could clearly see that she had been the one who started it all. Marta was taken to the hospital, where she was told she had a mild concussion. The police, of course, found all the stolen items in her home and began returning them to their rightful owners. Although I didn't face any charges, the cops gave us a scolding and warned us that we should never try to take justice into our own hands, that what we should have done in the first place was to call the police and they would have taken care of it. Since then, Max and I have met several neighbors, and truth be told, none of them are like Fanny. What a relief. I was a full-blooded New Yorker. I was born, raised, and spent most of my life in that city, but after graduating from college, my best friend Melina and I decided it was time for an adventurous backpacking trip across the United States. It was an idea we had been thinking about for a while, so we had been saving up some of our student allowance to be able to fund this long trip, and we were super excited to finally get it started. We started in Pennsylvania and then made our way through Ohio and Illinois. After some discussion, we decided that our next destination would be Wisconsin. I was particularly anxious to go there because Bella, my stepsister, lived in that state and I hadn't seen her in years. Melina and I arrived in Wisconsin, and although we stayed in a hotel, we spent most of our time with Bella. When we arrived at her apartment, she opened the door with a squeal of delight. I burst out laughing, hugged her very tightly, and introduced her to Melina. My sister took us on a tour of the city, and although she said it was a boring place, I found it fascinating. However, she was a little disappointed that we weren't going to stay overnight at her house. I had to explain to her that we didn't want to make a mess of things in her small apartment. "Well, at least come have dinner with me," she pouted. I looked at Melina, who shrugged and smiled, so I turned to my sister and said yes, we were going. The idea of dinner at Bella's house resulted in chicken sandwich and soda. I couldn't complain because I love them. Plus, I have to say that those sandwiches were the best I had ever tasted. In the middle of our dinner, the doorbell rang. Bella commented something about a red wine she had hidden and couldn't find. Meanwhile, Melina was sitting quietly on the couch watching TV and not doing much else. I knew she would probably be a little uncomfortable with my sister, but I hoped that wasn't the case. The doorbell rang again, so I decided to go see who it was. I opened the door and was met by a delivery man who looked like a little boy. He had messy red hair, almost covered by a baseball cap. He looked in as if he was looking for something. I noticed he wasn't sure if he was wearing a franchise uniform, just sporting a red t-shirt. The guy had the Chains logo and he was carrying our order in his hands, but he looked weird, like he was somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. His eyes were twitching nervously as if he was afraid someone would catch him. "Hey," I said after a couple of seconds of awkward silence. The boy focused his attention on me and passed me the food. Without another word, I closed the door and slipped back out. I knew Bella had already paid for the app, but she didn't even bother to wait for a tip. I walked back into the house feeling a little uneasy about how the delivery guy was looking at me. A shiver ran down my back as I carried the food into the living room. Melina was still flipping channels and Bella came in for a moment, smiling like she was in a cereal commercial. "Great, the food's here," she exclaimed, as she passed us the glasses of red wine. My friend settled into a news channel and I started unwrapping the sandwiches. The flavors were like fireworks in my mouth. "This is amazing," I blurted out between bites. Bella smiled with her red-stained lips and turned to Melina. "You like it? It's the best Chick-fil-A in the world." Melina nodded and responded with, "It's the best sandwich I've ever tasted." But I wasn't sure if Bella was excited because we were enjoying the food or if there was something else making her smile like that, which was a little unsettling. Then, the news channel started broadcasting a disturbing report. It seemed that there was a serial killer on the loose in the city who was targeting young girls. They showed chilling details of how the guy operated, and I felt sick when they mentioned that some of the victims had been brutally dismembered. Suddenly, my stomach lurched and I noticed Melina's lips trembling. The images of the dead girls were disturbing. They were all young and pretty. Bella looked intrigued, her eyes sparkling as she followed the news. "Oh, I know one of the girls," she commented about one of the victims. And then she went on to talk about each of them, mentioning that she knew them but without a hint of fear about being the next possible victim. The lack of empathy he showed made me even more uncomfortable. "Excuse me, I'm going to the bathroom," I muttered and stood up, feeling my head spinning. Perhaps I had had too much wine. As I searched for the bathroom, I ended up in a different room. At first, it looked like a simple storage room with a freezer and some boxes, but then I noticed a small trail of blood on the floor, subtle but disturbing, which led me to the freezer. Curiosity got the better of me and I opened the door, but what I saw made me feel nauseous. There was a lot of blood and things that looked like human body parts that I simply couldn't identify. I ran out of there with my heart racing. I quickly returned to the living room where Bella was now alone enjoying her wine. I carefully approached her and told her we should leave, but I didn't know how to explain why. It was at that moment that I looked at the television and realized that Bella was also looking at me and Melina with a very disturbing expression. Melina uttered my name shakily, and when I looked towards her, I saw that she was holding a piece of paper that looked like it was stained with grease. She passed it to me, and on it, it said, "Bella is the serial killer." As I read that, I went cold, as if I couldn't move. My limbs were shaking and I felt like fainting. I turned and saw the same fear reflected in Melina's eyes, and I knew we were both terrified. The delivery man was trying to warn us. Melina slyly told me that she had found the paper under the bag of food. We needed to escape, but our minds and bodies seemed blocked. Could it be that my stepsister spiked the wine with something? "Hello, beautiful ones." Bella's voice sounded shrill and my stomach instantly churned. We turned around and there she was, approaching with a knife in her hand. I wanted to cry, but all that came out of my mouth was silence. "Don't worry, I won't kill you. Or maybe I will," she joked as she laughed. But I felt the terror engulfing me. I imagined Bella developing on me as she lay on the floor, stabbed and helpless. I couldn't think of anything. My sight was trapped on Bella, who was getting closer and closer with that huge knife and her psycho face. I felt guilty for getting Melina into this mess. "Don't worry, sis, it's going to be quick. It doesn't hurt," she said with a sinister smile that chilled my blood. "Don't touch her," shouted Melina suddenly, lunging towards Bella with a chair in her hands. Bella was so focused on me she didn't see it coming and crashed to the floor with a thud, but she still had the knife in her hand and glared at me angrily. For some reason, Melina had had the intelligence not to take a drop of the wine. She only pretended to, but we were scared and unarmed. Suddenly, Bella got up from the floor and with almost unbelievable agility, lunged at Melina. I yelled at her to stop, but suddenly, my vision went dark. I stopped feeling my legs and collapsed to the floor. The next thing I remember was waking up hearing sirens. Then I saw Melina hugging me, full of blood. She told me that she had narrowly escaped and that the delivery man had called the police. They arrived just in time to rescue us, but the thought that we might have been the next victims left me terrified. I thought of those traces of blood in the freezer and shuddered, knowing that somehow we had been saved from an absolutely chilling fate.